it's like a Deming continuous improvement cycle.
It really is.
It's a plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, act. It
Yep,
really
that's
is
exactly what it is.
So number 3 is really engagement and ownership to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I mean, from
Yep.
your example, fire
Right.
safety and
That's right.
parks and, okay.
Well, and I'll give you an example of what come out of that. One of the discussions we had at a budget workshop was one of the best ones I've ever been in. The fire chief stood up and said, you know, and I couldn't believe it come out of his mouth, but response times didn't matter. I can get a firefighter to a fire in a heartbeat. But when he just stands there, he didn't have the training to do what he does. Now what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, it's not response times. Let's talk about confining a fire to the room of origin. Now let's have a discussion. What training do I need? Maybe it's not a $1 million piece of equipment to get there. It may be a rural area fire. There's a lot of alternatives that came out of that. A lot of ways of doing business that was different in the past. And that became a great discussion at that point.
Okay.
Not once did they get down into, say, their training budget. They can, and they could have easily gotten there. In the first year, actually, they did kind of get down and, okay, well, what does this mean? Tell me more about that. But the reason that question was asked was to really say, okay, you need that because you're talking about the confining to the room of origin. And cardiac arrest rate was another one, and that was a MedAct issue. We want to be able to, because the first responders were the firefighters. They got to the scene first. Well, we wanted them to get on the ambulance and live all the way to the hospital. Well, that meant paramedics on the rigs. And then that measurement cycle brought us back to the next year and talking about what those outcomes were. And did we hit them? But it all started with that goal, that outcome we wanted to see as a governing body. And a lot of that was fed by the directors, saying, okay, well, you tell me it's a safe community. Okay, what does that really mean? Safe community means 100 different things. Well, let's talk about that. You got police and fire. To them, it means a lot of different things. So let's kind of zero in on why you want it to be a safe community. This next slide gives you a little bit more detail about it. I won't go through each one of them. We've kind of already talked about them. The first one, the stakeholder input, those are just options I've seen out there. I've even seen a budget interaction on a Keeple TV show up in Olathe, it was phenomenal to be able to try to pull that off. But you can get stakeholder input anywhere. Comprehensive plan was several workshops with the public that came in. 200-300 people came in at a time to talk about what that comprehensive plan needed to look like. Talked about long-term goals, where do you want to be, whatever, 5, 10, 15, sometimes it's 40 years down the road as a growing community. Short-term goals are really focused on, okay, that's great, but I can only deal with the here and now as a director. I knew I could only deal with what you gave me today and how that matters tomorrow, and tomorrow being next year. But each one of those are small steps toward that long-term goal. Direction of staff, obviously that is essential. Being able to talk about what your expectations are out of that budget and being led by the professional staff to make your job easier dealing with the policy level issues and those outcomes that you want to see. The operating budget impacts, this is where we set the strategy, we know what that strategy looked like. Now, what do you expect to get out of that budget? Not you, but the directors. What do they expect? What are their goals? What do they see as outcomes to that? And then it's adopting the budget program and CIP and saying this is what we adopted, this is how we adopted. And a front page, if not 4 pages, say, from the city manager that says here's what's in this budget, public. It's oriented toward the public. Here's what's in it. Here's the process we used. Here's what we expect to achieve. And then that becomes a regular process throughout your budget cycles. And then monitor. As the mayor said, it's really the closeout loop to this process. You monitor the progress, and then you make the adjustments as they're necessary. And you know, in the recession, those adjustments were immediate. We didn't wait a year to do it. You do it month by month by month. You had to throw out your old forecast because none of it made sense. Sales tax was in the dump. But those decisions, the nimbleness that even you guys had to react to was not something that's typical of a government. So a lot of that feedback loop and then adjustments need to happen quicker than what the state says is required on a budget process. Some of it doesn't have to be. appropriations for the next year can change based on what those outcomes might look like. So as the last slide, what is the answer? The top three involve you intensely. Setting the priorities is probably one of the most important processes you can go through. It's not a short process. It can go to really implement this fully would be 3 to 5 years, I would say. Some cases, like Olathe, it took 9. And they're still not done with it. And I know they've got a lot of this integrated. Other communities on the East Coast have a lot of this integrated. If you talk to any of them, you're going to hear them say, we're not done. It means a whole lot to have those kind of discussions with our governing body, because we know more about where they want to be and how we're going to get them there. So the priorities ended up being extremely important. Setting the price of each of those priorities, what are you willing to pay? And that really comes down to what you can see of what staff can give you as far as what their budgets look like and how they apply toward those goals. Of course, the goals start first, and then come that discussion of what that price tag may look like. And it sometimes is a give and take. We can't do this with this because we need more money to do it. A famous example, obviously, is repaving a road, which everybody's had that, infrastructure issues. Okay, we've got 15 different ways to improve that street. How do you want it to look? And the Public Works Director will tell you. You've got an enormous amount of possibility here, and each one of them have pros and cons. We've had a set amount of dollars, and here's how we can approach it. Then you get into life cycle, street life cycle, and the rating systems, and it's a great discussion. You end up with some of those goals and the strategy to reach what you want to see. And that's the plan. You develop a plan for each one of those priorities. That is budgeting for outcomes. Obviously, I'm not doing it justice. There are week-long courses on this stuff. And, I can say that not one entity does it the same. You can give these graphs right here, these two right there. It can be adopted in pieces, in parts. That's right for your community, for Gardner, and can be all done at one time, which is an enormous undertaking. It takes a lot of your time, but I think it's a strategic discussion that makes sense. Because what you're doing is developing outcomes for the way you want Gardner to look. So with that, any other questions? I'd be wide open, and I hope I hit the time.
I actually, so when you talk about setting the priorities and then setting the price of each priority,
Yeah.
during that, is it recommended that you also understand, kind of like a business case view, so here's paving the road, so here's the options and the cost for the different types of pavement that you can utilize, and here's the payback. Does that happen then, or is it just really, here's the priority and here's the cost?
What I've seen in the past, especially with infrastructure, it becomes obviously much more involved discussion than just here's the price and here's the priority, only because there's so many options out there. But they are finite options. Asphalt costs so much. You got microseal and a number of other possibilities, and they all do certain things to the life cycle of a road. They all have pros and cons. Now, that is, I would expect, the Public Works Director can correct me, but there is a cost to that, and it's set on how much, say, a mile of road would cost.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go to another budget, you can approach different tactics, different ways. And if you have a goal for a safe community, and that safe community is defined as one outcome, then there may be several different approaches you can have that have several different costs to it. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's like that confining room to origin.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get somebody there quick, but then who am I going to get there quick? It's going to be the paramedic on the truck. Well, if he's not going because there's no body involved, then that's a one cost. If it's the other three guys showing up to really get after it, then that's a different cost.
So really, it comes down to how well the goals are defined. So if
That's
you're
exactly
using the road analogy, you would
Yeah.
say, I want the roads to be built in a way that they last for X period of time, 10 years or that they meet or exceed the expected life cycle for at
Right.
such and such a time. And then Public Works folks can take that information go to the engineers, and the engineers